Lesson planning is useful not only to ensure that you are able to cover all the material you need to cover in a learning experience, but also to guide you in scaffolding the longitudinal learning for students. According to Algonquin College's Professor Support Materials, a lesson plan contains 6 parts. These are learning objectives. What learning goals do you want to achieve in the class? Bridge in, the hook in your lesson plan to interest the learner. Teaching content, the curriculum you will deliver and explore throughout the lesson. Learning activities, integrate strategies to engage learners in active learning. Assessment, either informal or formal assessment. Are the learning objectives achieved in the class? Relate to summative assessment, feedback from students and peers on the lesson plan. Let's dive into each of these a little more in depth and within the context of teaching accessibility. Let's get started writing a lesson objective that could be used in your course to teach students how to be ready to utilize integrated accessibility tools. A well-written lesson objective has 3 distinct components. First is the verb. What action are students going to perform to demonstrate they have achieved the learning expectation? Most faculty are very familiar with Bloom's taxonomy or Marzow's taxonomy. Either of these are good places to start. Think about an action a student could take that you can observe. One that may come to mind is something like demonstrate or investigate. I like to think about the assignment as I'm choosing this verb. I ask myself, what are you going to have the students submit for the assignment? Then I make sure the verb matches the submission. For this example, I'm going to use the verb demonstrate. Next, we need to think about what the student is going to do with that verb. In my example, what is the student going to demonstrate for me? In this particular lesson, I'll have the students submit some evidence of their ability to review a work product that has been able to pass a particular integrated accessibility checker. So, the student will demonstrate the use of the accessibility checker that is integrated into the particular digital technology. Now, we'll move on to the final part of a lesson objective, the why of what the student will do. You'll need to relate why the ability to successfully review a product for accessibility is important. In my example, the why is to provide an engaging experience for all users of the product. So now we have all 3 parts of the learning objective. Demonstrate, the verb. A successful accessibility review, the what? To ensure an engaging experience for all users of the product, the why. Now, with it all put together, the entire lesson objective is: students will demonstrate the ability to successfully review a work product using an integrated accessibility tool, ensuring an engaging experience for all users of the work product. Now that we've successfully written a single learning objective, let's take a look at a few others just for comparison's sake. Read this lesson objective. Can you find all 3 parts? Students will apply accessibility standards to a mobile application, resulting in an accessible user experience. Look for the 3 parts. Can you find the verb? How about what will be done with the verb? Can you find the why of the objective? Verb, apply. What? Accessibility standards. Why? Accessible user experience. Let's try another one. Students will create an accessible user interface. Look for the 3 parts. Can you find the verb? How about what will be done with the verb? Can you find the why of the objective? Verb, create. What? Accessible user interface. Why? This part is missing from this example. Now it's your turn. Use this model to write a lesson objective that could be used in one of your current course meetings. Make sure you include the 3 parts. Use the diagram if that is helpful for you. Use the provided image, walk through the diagram with these 3 parts, and then assemble them together on screen. The bridge in or the hook of your lesson plan is intended to get the student's attention. Typically, this is most helpful if triggered by an experience or memory. In terms of trying to teach accessibility, consider giving an example that forces the students to rely on a sense that you can easily mask. I'm thinking of possibly asking someone in class to describe the smell of a skunk without saying the words skunk or spray. Limiting the vocabulary, like in the game Taboo, forces the student who is doing the description and the students who are listening to rely on other ways of knowing what the describing student is talking about. An activity like this will hook the students into creating an interest in what the learning is for the lesson. Now comes the part of the lesson plan that is typically the first thought for most faculty: the teaching content. This part of the lesson plan is where you'll reference the concepts that will be covered in the time allotted for learning. Best practices in pedagogy state that the delivery or lecture part of the lesson should be chunked into 10 to 15-minute sections with a short reinforcement activity at the end of each section. This can be done simply by stopping the delivery of a lecture and having students turn to a neighbor and restate the most important element of the previous 10 to 15-minute portion of the lecture and explain why they think it's the most important. Learning activities come either after all of the 10 to 15-minute segments or can be embedded within the segments as the reinforcement activity. The learning activities are intended for the students to reinforce what they have learned and begin to move the learning from short-term to long-term memory. This should be a low-stakes or formative activity. Assessing whether or not students have learned the intended concepts for the lesson all ties back to the learning objectives. What did you say the students would learn? How can the students demonstrate that learning? The answer to these two questions is the assessment. For instance, if my lesson objective was for students to utilize assistive technology to review a website, ensuring accessibility for all users, then I would need to have the students use an accessibility checker to review a website and report back their findings along with potential resolutions for those findings. The method of reporting doesn't matter. It can be a paper, a video recording, a checklist, or almost anything that provides the results of that review. Then the students would also need to provide input on possible ways to resolve any accessibility issues that were identified. This would naturally tie into students eventually building a website that is built with accessibility in mind. So the connection to the summative assessment is that by completing the assignment, the students would not only learn how to use the accessibility checker, but also understand what potential pitfalls are overlooked when designing a website for accessibility and therefore be able to plan for those pitfalls in the design stages of building a website. Now it's your turn. Take a look at the lesson plan in this module and identify the areas of strength and the areas of weaknesses that could be improved upon.